Most people move through life believing that the choices they make are entirely their own, that their successes and failures are the direct results of conscious effort, and that freedom means being able to decide at will. But Owen Hermstring points out that this is one of the greatest illusions humanity lives under. Beneath the surface of your conscious mind lies a set of what he calls secret contracts, hidden agreements you never consciously signed, yet they bind you with the same force as a legal document. These contracts are not written on paper. They are etched into the subconscious, and they govern the way you perceive yourself, the way you respond to others, and ultimately the way reality reflects back to you. Hermstring explains that these contracts are not created in adulthood, but in childhood, long before we had the awareness to question them. They are shaped by the words spoken in our homes, the attitudes of our parents, the tone of teachers, the silent expectations of society, and the traumas or rejections we experienced early on. If a child grows up hearing that they are too much, too loud, or undeserving, those words become a silent agreement. I agree to be small, so I am not rejected. If another child constantly receives the message that love must be earned through performance, the contract might read, I agree that my worth depends on my success. None of us remember signing these papers, but the subconscious accepted the terms, and reality has been honoring the agreement ever since. These secret contracts explain why so many people feel trapped even when they work hard or try to think positively. On the surface, they are saying affirmations like, I am worthy of abundance, but deep inside, the contract is still active, whispering, I am not allowed to have more than survival. The subconscious always wins, because it is the deeper code running beneath conscious thought. As Hermstring writes in The Law Behind the Laws, reality does not respond to what you wish for in the moment. It responds to the contracts you carry without remembering you ever made them. Think of these contracts like an invisible operating system. On your computer screen, you might see apps, images, or documents you consciously open, but underneath, a hidden program runs the entire machine. If that program is corrupted, everything you try to do on the surface glitches. In the same way, if your subconscious contracts are written with scarcity, fear, or unworthiness, no amount of surface-level effort can override the underlying code. This is why so many people feel they are living someone else's life, repeating cycles they do not understand, and asking themselves why they never seem to move forward, no matter what they try. Hermstring emphasizes that these contracts are binding precisely because they are hidden. You cannot change what you do not see. That is why awareness is the first act of liberation. The mirror of life, the repeated patterns, the frustrations, the relationships that seem to follow the same painful script, are not punishments from fate. They are reflections of the contracts still in effect. Every time you wonder why you end up in the same kind of job, the same kind of heartbreak, or the same kind of financial struggle, life is showing you the contract. It is saying, this is what you agreed to without knowing it. One of the most striking insights Hermstring offers is that these contracts are often generational. You are not just living under your own agreements, but under the codes passed down from parents, grandparents, and ancestors who themselves never questioned the binding rules of their time. A family that lived through scarcity may unconsciously pass down the contract of limitation. We survive, but we never thrive. A lineage marked by betrayal might pass down the contract of mistrust. No one is safe to love. These contracts are not your fault, but they become your responsibility once you see them. Awareness hands you the pen, and you must decide whether to keep signing or finally refuse. Consider how many people pursue success, yet sabotage themselves just before they achieve it. On the surface, it looks like fear of failure or laziness, but Hermstring shows that beneath it lies a contract, Something like, "I agree never to surpass my father," or "I agree to prove my loyalty by never leaving behind the struggle of my family." These are the kinds of agreements no one remembers making, yet they have the power to dictate destinies. The tragedy is not that people lack potential, but that they unknowingly keep honoring contracts that limit them. Hermstring is careful to note that uncovering these hidden agreements is not about blame. It is not about resenting parents, society, or the past. It is about reclaiming authorship. He writes, "A contract is binding until you remember you did not write it. Once you see it, you hold the choice to keep living by it or to break the code and create your own law." This moment of realization can be both painful and liberating. Painful because you see how much of your life has been shaped by agreements you never truly wanted. Liberating because you finally understand that you have the authority to renegotiate reality. When you realize you are living under secret contracts, the world begins to look different. Instead of chaos or randomness, you see patterns that make sense. Instead of asking, "Why me?" you ask, "What law is still in effect here?" This shift in perception is the beginning of freedom. You cannot break a contract you don't know exists, but once you see it clearly, you are no longer bound by ignorance. You are free to choose differently. The hidden agreement you never signed may have defined your past, but it does not have to define your future. The pen has always been in your hand, though you may not have realized it. The question is whether you will keep unconsciously signing the same binding code, or whether you will wake up, see the truth, and begin the process of rewriting the contract of your life. Once a secret contract is written into your subconscious, it becomes more than just a background belief. It turns into what Owen Hermstring describes as a binding code, an invisible algorithm silently shaping the flow of your life. The most unsettling truth about this code is that it does not operate only in the big decisions you consciously agonize over. It influences even the smallest choices, the ones you barely notice. Day after day, those subtle choices accumulate and create a reality that feels eerily consistent, as if you are reliving the same story with different characters and circumstances. The binding code is why your life can feel like déjà vu, not because fate is cruel, but because your subconscious is faithfully running a program you forgot you inherited. Hermstring explains that the binding code works much like gravity. You cannot see it, you cannot hear it, and you cannot opt out of it by ignoring it. Yet it pulls on every decision, drawing you back toward the terms of the contract you unknowingly agreed to. For example, someone living under the hidden agreement, "I am unworthy of stability," may unconsciously seek out chaos, whether in their finances, relationships, or career. Even when stability is offered, they find ways to sabotage it, because the code insists that stability is not for them. Another person who carries the contract, "I must never outshine others," might deliberately play small, avoid opportunities, or turn down promotions, rationalizing it as humility, when in truth it is obedience to the old binding code. This is why Hermstring insists that positive thinking alone is never enough. You can affirm new desires with your conscious mind, but if the subconscious contract is still in place, the binding code will override your surface wishes. You can say to yourself, "I deserve love," but if the old contract still reads, "I am destined to be abandoned," then you will gravitate toward relationships that repeat the cycle. Life does not respond to your conscious preferences. It responds to the contracts you honor, even when you are unaware of them. The insidious nature of the binding code is that it disguises itself as free will. When you make a choice, you believe you are choosing freely, but the options you even consider are already filtered by the code. If you hold the hidden agreement, "I must struggle to prove my worth," then you may not even notice the easy path available to you, or you may dismiss it as too good to be true. The code edits reality much like a lens edits the light passing through it, so that you only perceive what aligns with the contract. Hermstring writes, "The most powerful prison is the one where the prisoner believes the walls are natural." Perhaps the most painful demonstration of the binding code is seen in relationships. Time and again, people find themselves with partners who mirror the very wounds they hope to escape. The one who grew up with rejection finds themselves rejected again. The one who was controlled finds themselves under control again. Outsiders may look at their choices and wonder why they keep picking the wrong person, but Hermstring reminds us that it is not a matter of choice in the conscious sense. The code is running, and until it is rewritten, the mirror will always return the same reflection. In his book, The Law Behind the Laws, Hermstring illustrates this with the story of a man who spent decades repeating financial failures. Every time he gained momentum, something would happen. A lost deal, an unexpected bill, a sudden collapse, and he would end up back at zero. When they traced the pattern, the hidden contract was revealed. "I must not surpass the struggles of my father." This agreement, written unconsciously as a child, watching his father's hardships, became the binding code that shaped his decisions. The man believed he was simply unlucky, but in truth his subconscious was ensuring he remained faithful to the contract. It was not fate, it was programming. The code also explains why change often feels impossible. Even when you deliberately choose something new, the binding code quietly pushes you back into the old cycle. It whispers reasons, rationalizations, and excuses that make your decisions seem logical. You convince yourself you are being practical, when in reality you are just staying inside the boundaries of the contract. Hermstring calls this the enforcement clause of the code, the subconscious mechanisms that protect the contract from being broken. Fear, doubt, procrastination, and self-sabotage are not random. They are the enforcers of the hidden agreement. And yet, Hermstring insists, the fact that the code influences every decision is not cause for despair, but for hope. For if the code has such power to shape your life unconsciously, imagine the power of consciously writing a new code. Imagine how different your decisions would feel if they flowed from a contract you chose deliberately rather than one imposed upon you. The same gravity that once pulled you down could pull you upward if the direction of the force were altered. This is why awareness is not enough. Recognizing the hidden agreement is only the first step. The deeper work is to bring the code into the light, examine its terms, and decide whether you will continue to honor it. You must begin to notice the ways it shows up in your daily choices. From the jobs you apply for, to the risks you avoid, to the relationships you allow. Each decision is an opportunity to either reinforce the old contract or begin writing a new one. Hermstring frames it this way. Every yes and every no is a signature on the contract of your life. With this perspective, you begin to see that freedom is not something distant or abstract. It is in the present moment, in the micro-decisions where you can choose to stop co-signing the old agreement. Even when fear rises, even when doubt whispers, even when the enforcement clause tries to hold you back, every act of conscious choice is a renegotiation. The binding code shapes every decision until you decide to stop letting it. It is not easy work, but it is possible. The power lies not in resisting the code, but in rewriting it, so that your decisions flow naturally toward the life you desire. When that happens, freedom is not forced, it is embodied, and your reality finally begins to reflect the law you consciously chose. Discovering the hidden agreements that have been shaping your life is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because now you finally see the invisible hands that kept pulling the strings. Terrifying because once you see them, you cannot unsee them. You realize that much of what you thought was fate or coincidence was really obedience to a binding code you never knowingly chose. The temptation at this stage is to fight the code directly, to attempt to smash it with willpower or deny it with aggressive positivity. But as Owen Hermstring explains, breaking the binding code is not about breaking yourself. If you try to destroy it through force, you often end up reinforcing the very law you were trying to escape. Hermstring compares this to quicksand. The more violently you struggle, the deeper you sink. In the same way, when you declare war on the subconscious code, you unconsciously confirm that it still has authority over you. For example, if your hidden contract reads, "I am unworthy of love," and you spend every day angrily proving your worth, what you are really doing is revolving your entire life around the belief that you are unworthy. You are still bound, only in a different form. The goal is not to wrestle with the code, but to renegotiate it. Renegotiation begins with naming the code clearly. Hermstring stresses that the subconscious cannot be shifted by vague gestures. If you do not articulate the exact terms of the contract, the law remains in effect. Naming is an act of power. When you can say, "I see that my life has been governed by the belief that I must struggle to deserve success," you strip the code of its invisibility. The contract that once hid in the dark is now on the table where it can be examined. This is the first step in breaking free, shining light on what was once unseen. Once the contract is named, the next step is what Hermstring calls replacement. This is where you choose a new law to replace the old one. But here again, he warns against the shallow temptation of empty affirmations. Saying, "I am successful on the surface," while still embodying "I must struggle underneath," will not break the code. The subconscious is not moved by words alone. It is convinced by evidence and experience. That is why the replacement law must be chosen carefully and must feel believable enough to begin embodying. Instead of jumping from "I must struggle to deserve success" to "everything comes to me effortlessly," which might feel like a lie to your nervous system, you might replace it with "My worth is not measured by struggle, and I allow myself to succeed with greater ease." This is not about magical thinking, but about incremental truth. The third stage is embodiment. This is where the new law becomes more than an idea and starts to be lived. Hermstring insists that the subconscious rewrites itself not through inspiration, but through repetition. Every time you act in alignment with the new law, you are inscribing it deeper into your inner code. For example, someone who replaces "I am invisible" with "My presence matters" must take small but consistent actions to embody visibility, speaking up in meetings, sharing their opinions, allowing themselves to be seen. Each act of embodiment is a signature on the new contract, and over time, the mirror of reality begins to reflect the change. But Hermstring also reminds us of the importance of gentleness. Breaking the code is not about rejecting yourself for having lived under it for so long. It is about understanding that you were surviving with the tools you had. If you approach the process with self-hatred or impatience, you risk creating a new contract just as binding as the old one. "I must fix myself to be worthy." That too is a trap. True liberation requires compassion. The energy you bring to rewriting the contract is as important as the words themselves. If you bring kindness, patience, and acceptance, the subconscious opens to change much faster than when you bring judgment. Hermstring provides a striking example in his writing. A man carried the hidden contract, "I must not surpass my older brother." For decades, every time he approached success, he sabotaged himself. At first, he tried to fight the contract with rage and rebellion, forcing himself into achievements. But the deeper he pushed, the more his life collapsed, because his energy was still rooted in the agreement. The turning point came when he named the contract, replaced it with, "I am free to live my own path," and began to embody it through choices that reflected independence rather than rivalry. The result was not a violent break, but a graceful release. Success came, and this time it stayed, because it was not built on rebellion, but on authenticity. This illustrates Hermstring's core principle. You cannot break the code by breaking yourself. You must work with the subconscious, not against it. The subconscious is not an enemy, but a loyal servant, faithfully executing the contracts it was given. When you hand it a new contract with consistency and compassion, it will just as faithfully execute the new terms. This is why breaking the code is not about erasing your past, but about rewriting your future with awareness. The final stage of breaking the code is integration. This is when the new law becomes so natural that you no longer need to think about it. You no longer catch yourself reverting to the old agreement because it has dissolved. At this point, the mirror of life begins to change in undeniable ways. People treat you differently. Opportunities open. Cycles that once repeated stop repeating. It feels almost magical, but Hermstring insists it is nothing mystical at all. It is simply the law of life, responding to the new contract you have consistently embodied. Breaking the binding code without breaking yourself is ultimately about remembering that you are not the contract. You are the one who can write, rewrite, and choose again. Reality has always been reflecting your agreements, but it was never holding you hostage. It was waiting for you to remember your authorship. And once you do, the code no longer controls you. You control it. The moment you break the hidden agreements that once ruled your life is not marked by fireworks or dramatic revelation. It is subtler, quieter, and infinitely more powerful. It feels like breathing freely for the first time. It feels like looking at the same world you have always known, but realizing the chains that kept you bound are gone. This is what Owen Hermstring describes as reclaiming reality as your own. You stop living under the binding code of secret contracts, and you begin living from the conscious laws you deliberately choose. For the first time, life becomes yours. Reclaiming reality does not mean that life suddenly becomes easy or that challenges disappear. Instead, it means that challenges no longer feel like punishments and setbacks no longer serve as proof of old beliefs. You understand that reality is not an enemy, but a mirror. It reflects the law you hold within yourself. When you live by contracts imposed upon you without consent, that mirror can feel harsh and unfair. But once you rewrite the code, the mirror reflects something entirely different: freedom, alignment, and authorship. Hermstring is careful to explain that reclaiming reality is not a one-time act, but an ongoing practice. Just as old contracts were reinforced by repetition, your new conscious laws must also be lived daily. Every choice you make, every action you take is a signature on the law you now embody. If you have replaced "I must struggle to deserve" with "I am worthy of ease and flow," then every time you allow yourself to receive without guilt, you are reclaiming reality. If you have replaced "I must not outshine others" with "My light uplifts those around me," then every time you step forward unapologetically, you are reclaiming reality. The beauty of this process is that it begins to shift your perception. The world that once seemed hostile begins to feel cooperative. People who once mirrored your old wounds begin to treat you differently, or they fade from your life entirely, replaced by those who reflect your new truth. Opportunities that once seemed invisible suddenly appear, not because they were never there, but because you now recognize yourself as someone who deserves them. Life did not change arbitrarily. You changed the law, and the mirror responded. Hermstring recounts in The Law Behind the Laws the story of a woman who lived under the hidden contract, "I am destined to be left behind." Every relationship, every job, every friendship ended with her being abandoned. When she uncovered the contract and rewrote it to, "I am worthy of commitment and stability," her reality began to shift. At first, the old cycles tried to reassert themselves, but she kept embodying the new law. She stayed steady in her actions, chose differently, and refused to co-sign the old agreement. In time, her relationships became secure, her career stable, her friendships lasting. She had not simply been lucky, she had reclaimed her reality. This is why Hermstring insists that reclaiming reality is the ultimate act of freedom. You are no longer a passive recipient of life, blaming destiny or circumstance. You are no longer the prisoner of invisible contracts. You stand as the author of your own existence, consciously choosing what law you will embody and trusting life to reflect it. The laws of reality are consistent and unbending, but they are not cruel. They serve faithfully. Once you install a new law with sincerity and consistency, reality honors it. There is, however, one final caution Hermstring offers. Reclaiming reality is not about ego. It is not about forcing the universe to give you what you want by sheer willpower. That too becomes another contract. I must control everything to be safe. True freedom comes from alignment, not control. When you reclaim reality, you understand that you are not fighting life, you are co-creating with it. The law you write within yourself resonates outward, and life reflects it. The shift is not forced, it is natural. The power of reclaiming reality also lies in its ripple effect. When you break your contracts and live by new laws, you unconsciously give permission for others to do the same. You model what freedom looks like, and those around you feel inspired to examine their own binding codes. In this way, reclaiming reality is not just personal, but collective. You contribute to a new world where fewer people live as prisoners of invisible scripts, and more people live as conscious creators. As this journey comes to a close, the essential truth remains. Reality was never truly yours, while the hidden contracts were in control. You thought you were choosing, but you were obeying. You thought you were free, but you were bound. Now, with awareness, compassion, and consistent embodiment, you can tear up those old agreements and write new ones. You can reclaim reality not as a dream, not as a distant hope, but as a lived truth. And so the mirror waits once more. It does not judge, it does not resist, it simply reflects. The question is, what contract will you hand it today? Will it be the old one, heavy with fear and scarcity, or will it be the new one, written with freedom, worthiness, and alignment? The choice is yours, and the mirror is faithful. When you reclaim reality as your own, the unseen laws no longer bind you. They serve you. And life itself becomes the canvas on which you write the story of who you have chosen to become. That is the shift. That is the liberation. And it begins the moment you stop living by contracts you never signed and start living by the law you consciously choose.